Scholarly editing is the annual journal of the Association for Documentary Editing, also known as the ADE. As I will suggest, responsibility and reinvention are embedded in the DNA of its historic and current publication platforms. In the first half of my presentation, I will explain this assertion by describing a series of ADE publications and editorial boards seeking to help communities preserve their cultural heritages. In the second half, I will present case studies from the journal that represent this process. Founded in, wait, can you do advanced, or I just do spacebar? Yeah. Spacebar? Okay. Founded in 1978 for the purpose of producing editions of the papers of American statesmen, reformers, and authors, the ADE initially served as a resource, primarily for 18th and 19th century historians, and secondarily for literary scholars interested in textual scholarship. With notable exceptions, among them the papers of Martin Luther King and Lucretia Coffin Mott as representative examples, members' editions typically centered on elite white American men whose writings were edited for an academic audience. From its inception, the ADE featured responsibility and reinvention in its efforts to nurture its chosen community. It was created expressly to support the work of documentary editors and to promote the practice of documentary editing. The ADE's first official publication, a print newsletter, likewise conveyed this sensibility. First published in 1979, it supplied information to members, amplified their achievements, and reported on the organization's administrative committees. In 1984, the first transformation began. The newsletter shifted to a quarterly journal entitled Documentary Editing, published editorial scholarship, reviews of documentary editions, and transcripts of the presidential address delivered to members at the annual ADE conference. In 2012, the publication reinvented itself once more. University of Nebraska-Lincoln scholars Andrew Jewell, Amanda Gailey, and Karen Dalziel imagined something entirely new, scholarly editing, a born digital open access annual highlighting American and Western European textual scholarship, reviews of editions and DH projects, and small-scale digital editions, some of them bilingual. Featuring editorial theory, analysis, reviews, micro-editions, and ADE presidential addresses, the editorial team published 6 volumes and served anyone with internet access and interest in textual scholarship, Western source materials, and digital humanities. In 2019, after a 2-year hiatus in the journal's publication and in her capacity as ADE Publications Director, Sylvia Glick decided to revive the journal. She formed advisory and editorial boards, selected Kathryn, Tomaszek, and me to serve as co-editors, and together we resuscitated the journal, taking a full year to proceed deliberately with our revitalization planning, include conducting a listening tour among ADE members, as well as other communities of editors, teachers, historians, literary scholars, librarians, archivists, and granting agency representatives. The third reinvention had begun, but we also reproduced a publication platform committed to seeking out and welcoming diverse communities. Likewise, in expanding the geographic reach, content, audience, and communities the journal serves, our team extended the transformative vision of the previous editors, albeit with a twist, shifting our focus from textual scholarship to recovery, broadly conceived. At that point, we had learned that editing is but one form of recovery, and that many recovery practitioners, echoing Katie, would not identify as editors. We spent a year building the journal website and cultivating content before we published volume 39 in 2022. We began by changing the journal's statement of purpose, adding a public-facing component and several new sections, and implementing evolving strategies to enrich the work of contributors through ethical peer review guidelines and practices, mentoring, technological assistance, and developmental editing. We retained our predecessor's publication of essays, micro editions, and reviews of editions, DH projects, and the tools that facilitate that work. But our focus on recovery broadens those categories and multiplies communities of practitioners, editorial and advisory boards, general publics, and specialist readers. Outlining these ethics and goals in a revised statement of purpose, the editorial board of scholarly editing is committed to the recovery of texts and artifacts that represent and celebrate the lives of and contributions from and about Black, Latinx, and Indigenous peoples, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, women, LGBTQ+ individuals, and peoples of the Global South. In addition to projects that illustrate the traditional range of editorial methodologies and practices, we welcome those that feature rare or marginal texts, texts that dislodge the single author model, oral histories and tales, community recovery, creative works of rememory, and the decolonizing of artistic works, archives, records, and editions for the discoverability of racialized and underrepresented stories in cultural artifacts. So, very broadly, we seek practitioners who are exploring multimodal recovery activities, and we also invite contributors who produce decolonialist analyses and critiques. To further confirm our commitment to this statement of purpose, we added a statement on diversity and anti-racism, in which we pledged to diversify journal content, our boards, and our communities of readers and peer reviewers. Further, we commit to specific anti-racist actions. These goals are works in progress, and I really want to emphasize that. And although we have begun to move the needle in terms of the field's historic biases, we must continue to improve and recognize when new implementations fail or only moderately succeed, such as the goal of creating a truly public-facing journal. Our interest in education and public humanities prompted us to generate several new journal sections, a decision also informed by our feedback from our listening tour and our desire to learn from all custodians of knowledge. These sections include college and university classroom essays, which also calls for contributions from public outreach programs, voices and perspectives, interviews and conversations, which invites proposals for conversations and interviews from all recovery practitioners, including students and community groups, and uncovering and sustaining the cultural record, a section that explores diversities of practice and the context of knowledge production as theorized by Rafika Rassam. Among its central concerns are, in Rassam's words, how projects are designed, how material in them is framed, how data in them is managed, and what forms of labor are being used to create them. As the proceeding suggests, in these recently added sections, we pursue recovery work that takes place both inside and outside the academy, and often at a hyper-local level, and that's tough. Comprising but not limited to community groups, local historians and genealogists, K-12 students and teachers, and families seeking ancestors. We aspire to make those connections, admittedly, with only limited success so far, so we welcome recommendations and constructive critique. I'd also like to mention briefly some of the infrastructures we've put in place to welcome and encourage early career and non-academic people, and to attract new communities of readers and peer reviewers. As our contributing page proposes, we are committed to workflows that support these communities. Our core practices derive from our statement of purpose and include seeking out emerging scholars and non-academics, engaging in developmental editing as needed before peer review, and assisting with technologies, from using our OJS portal and proofing tools to the planning and creation of micro editions and multimodal interviews. Of course, the infrastructure that enables our editorial team to interact with its multiple communities and to display published content is the journal's website itself. And I'm giving a shout out right now to Raf, who is responsible for all of this. It is the bespoke creation of technical editor and micro editions editor, Raf Bionti, whose priorities center on sustainability and portability. Raf has established the journal as a static website that can easily be archived and moved from one hosting service to another as simply as possible. Static websites are made of files that browsers can display directly. This makes them particularly resilient because they can be stored and transferred like regular text files. The journal's technical stack is informed by minimal computing principles, and it reduces digital infrastructures as much as possible. This infrastructure is responsive to our feeling of responsibility to our communities of contributors who will not want to see their pieces disappear, and to our commitment to make that content accessible to as many groups as possible. In my remaining moments, I will highlight several of our publications that demonstrate the ways in which our allegiance to responsibility and reinvention has enabled us to cultivate and engage with multiple communities of recovery practitioners. I will briefly mention a few select pieces from Volume 39 and Volume 40 that represent different aspects of our statement of purpose before spending more extended time with content published in Volume 41 just this past June. In Volume 39, I will, In Volume 39, I will begin with Laura L. Milkey and Rachel Linnea Brown's micro edition, John Broom's Columbus Burlesque. It features both a unique text, the burlesque, as well as a decolonialist analysis of Columbus, that icon of European imperialism, who was also adapted wholesale into U.S. nationalism. On the public-facing front, Julian C. Chambliss and Scott A. French's essay, A Generative Praxis, Curation, Creation, and Black Counterpublics, details their experience of developing academic partnerships with the local community in Eatonville, Florida, with the Zora Neale Hurston Festival of the Arts and Humanities. As they note, with these allies, we leverage digital humanities practices to better understand the experience of heritage communities. The project spotlights a commitment to combine and amplify pedagogy and digital methodologies in order to create unique and sustainable archival materials for future research. Likewise public-facing and aimed at promoting multiple communities, G. Samantha Rosenthal's review, Mapping the Gay Guides, Visualizing Queer Space and American Life, examines Amanda Reagan and Eric Gonzaga's recovery of gay guidebooks to various cities. As Rosenthal argues, and I'm quoting him here, the project illuminates the goal of gay guidebooks in shaping how gay people in the United States thought about queer spaces in the 1960s and 1970s. In Volume 40, and as an example of our interest in recovery broadly conceived, the artist Marcia X presents a work of creative rememory in Emerging from the Vocal Void, A Journey Toward Afro-Indigenous Femme Subjectivity and Phenomenology. This is a voyage in self-recovery through performance art, activism, storytelling, and phenomenological experimentation. Marcia X's piece is also public-facing, much like the essay by Erica Piola, Sarah Weatherwax, and Anne Verplank, in which they discuss a pandemic-era virtual public workshop that enabled participants to acquire skill sets and then pass them on to both generalist and specialist readers. Volume 41 continues to attract those interested in our statement of purpose. As an overview of the entire volume, I can say that it includes additions, micro-additions, that expand access to documents that recover kinship and resistance practices among peoples of African and indigenous descent in colonial Louisiana, and that offers glimpses into northern rural women's marital, sexual, and reproductive lives during the U.S. Civil War. Likewise, the volume includes LGBTQ source materials for K through 12 classrooms, decolonialist narratives of interactions between Spanish and indigenous peoples in the U.S. Southwest, editorial interventions necessitated by wartime trauma, the affordances of digital tools and strategies to create innovative editions and engage with students, and the recovery of the lives and writings of Black feminists, Muslim women, queer coteries, and prisoners. I will comment on 3 pieces in this volume, 2 micro editions and 1 essay. All 3 advance both cutting-edge scholarship that will appeal to specialists and compelling narrative storylines that will attract all readers. I'll begin with Olivia Bernard, Emma Bilski, Leila Blackbird, Jessica Marie Johnson, and Ellie Palazzolo's Kinship and Longing, Keywords for Black Louisiana, a multilingual microedition that innovatively recovers enslaved Black and indigenous people's lives and stories through the words of their French and Spanish-speaking enslavers and other colonialist allies. Significantly, the editors wrest these life stories from legal, religious, and administrative documents that record colonizers' attempts to silence, control, and efface the culture, knowledge, and autonomy of those they have enslaved. Effectively, they tag every individual represented in these documents, and through keywords, aggregate narratives of life and the fostering of kinship and love, passion and longing, rebellion and self-care. Quoting only one such stirring tale from this micro-edition, in 1773, when Kathryn, an enslaved mulatresse on the Destrehan plantation, appeared before colonial Louisiana officials, she could not have known that her existence would reverberate across time and space into the 21st century. Enslaved in 1770s Louisiana, Katharina demanded her freedom and the freedom of her 5-year-old daughter, Felicite. When she confronted their enslavers, she stood ready to use every legal tool available to her. Being enslaved did not prevent or deter her from claiming what she thought was hers and fighting for those in her charge. Katharina's actions forced her owners to contend with her existence as a self-conscious, defiant, resourceful, and strategic actor, and also forced her into the historical record. On centuries-old manuscript pages, Katharina's name appears over and over. Her story unfolds over several pages, leaving the mark of her humanity and imagination in an archive steeped in violence, familial rupture, and racial terror. With similar narrative power in paper bullets, the Civil War letters of John and Phoebe Miller, Samantha Misa recovers the sexual, reproductive, and marital lives of rural, barely literate white women while their husbands were serving in the U.S. Civil War. The micro-edition features correspondence between John and Phoebe Miller, as well as that of their eldest son, Alonzo, and his wife, Sarah. The men's letters are frequently penned by fellow soldiers in differing hands. Throughout, one encounters eclectic phonetic spelling that essentially requires a translation. As a result, the micro-edition presents both a literal transcription of the documents and an option to switch to regularized, legible English. And this makes this, again, all the more accessible for specialists as well as general readers, so you can actually get the story that's emerging from these documents. The Miller Letter Collection is a fragmentary yet revealing source that narrates the demise of 2 marriages in one family. Shockingly, both men abandoned their wives for another woman. The ensuing drama and crucial information about rural white women in these letters illustrates a war that fundamentally reshaped intimate relationships. Civil War era scholarship has uncovered the world of middle and upper class northern literate white women who enjoyed robust reading and writing practices. These lower-class women lacked such resources and produced very few primary sources for the historical record. As a result, this cache of letters is noteworthy for the insights it provides, including frank and open discussions about sex, reproductive health, and childbirth. Ironically, for example, while John is blithely betraying his marital vows, Phoebe is suffering yet another pregnancy. In one letter, she appears to be in active labor with the birth of her 13th child. Finally, in reparative editing, working with Ukrainian authors in wartime, Amy Levin demonstrates why we need to reinvent editorial theories and practices in response to wartime trauma. She advocates a transition from the potentially abusive journalistic infrastructures and policies that establish editors and peer reviewers as gatekeepers who can repress unconventional work, new genres, and non-academic communities. In serving as the new board chair of the British journal Museum and Society, Levin inherited a special issue featuring the condition of Ukrainian museums after Russia's invasion in February 2022. As she maintains, the condition of utter devastation in Ukraine demand that we reimagine the relationship between editor and contributor, a set of practices and perspectives she characterizes as reparative editing. The circumstances of the journal's Ukrainian contributors, who possessed no command of English and whose institutions and personal lives were unraveling, motivated Levin to develop a collaborative relationship with them. More flexible human and digital infrastructures, forms of communication that met these war survivors where they live, and other forms of mentoring and compassionate encouragement. Reparative editing, she contends, challenges and disrupts long-standing processes, standards, and structures. By encouraging authors to voice trauma, grief, and anger, by enhancing the flow of voices rather than seeking an elusive ideal of objectivity, reparative editing has the potential to promote recovery. In claiming that the traditional editorial ideal of ostensibly neutral objectivity actually reinforces privilege, Levin rejects impersonal prose that excludes affective context. Her contributors were witnessing their repositories crumble and family members perish, a grim scenario that rendered them emotionally devastated while attempting to preserve their cultural heritage, if only in the pages of Levin's journal. To understand museum stories, she proposes, communities of readers and editors alike must learn how frantic efforts to store valuable artworks are complicated by the difficulties of obtaining vehicles and transporting packing materials across a city under attack. The most important purpose of scholarly writing is to disseminate new ideas or approaches to knowledge, she adds. Yet significant innovations have been delayed or lost because writing did not meet standards established by white patriarchal European Academy, or because work was not circulated in a widely known language or journal. This loss of knowledge has affected all humankind, all communities. Extending Levin's argument, reparative editing merits global consideration as our planet confronts numerous other wars, repressive regimes, and climate change. It's my hope that this brief overview of scholarly editing's most recent volumes demonstrates the varied ways in which its editorial board is attending to reinvention and responsibility, with the intention of amplifying diverse communities and of serving as a publication platform for all those interested in recovery, both inside and outside the Academy. Likewise, I hope I've tempted you to dip into our slowly emerging proof of concept journal and to spread the word within your networks. We welcome fresh collaborations and thank current and future contributors, peer reviewers, and readers for helping us to learn, evolve, and act with ethical responsibility.
Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit, one of the things that we're doing at eLaboratories is talking about how to train people in doing documentary editing and digital archive work and that kind of material. And it comes out of a long tradition of doing this as an in-person kind of workshops that we did. So from 1972 to 2019, there were in-person workshops that were funded by the National Historical Publications and Records Commission of the National Archives. And what they did is they would bring people together. First it was for 2 weeks, and then it became 1 week, and then it became kind of 4 days of bringing people together with a couple of trained, experienced editors to go through a lot of the steps that you did in trying to building an edition, things like selection and transcription and how to develop your own project. For years it was held at the University of Wisconsin for a really long time. I don't remember exactly when it switched, but then it started moving around the country to coincide with the meeting of the Association of Documentary Editors. And the idea behind that was that if you could then take the people who had just taken the course and bring them into the professional organization and try to hook them up with people and kind of encourage them to stay in. So in the beginning, they really talked about print editions. There wasn't a lot of interest in digital publication or in microfilm. Most of what I've heard from the earliest days, I actually took the 2-week version, but you would bring in a project, and the project might be a set of documents that you wanted to work with that you'd use as a kind of example as you went. And what they generally did is had you do a lecture in the morning and then work on your project in the afternoon and work directly with the mentor that you had. As time went on, the classes got a little bigger, the meeting got a little shorter, and we started doing things like presentations. So in the bottom slide, there's we did a kind of thing where each person would talk about their project and then talk about the challenges that they were facing and the kind of things they were hoping to get out of this. And that helped to jumpstart conversations. But over time, when I was there, I was the only person working on a microfilm edition, while other people were all doing print editions. So that was like, oh, we were doing images now. And now most of them, I would say, have been, in recent years, most have been digital editions, but there have been some print edition people who come in as print editions and come out as digital, or come out with both, the idea to do both. So it's changed the content over the time, a lot based on the technologies that have changed in editing. So the way it was funded, it was from this grant from the NHPRC, and they funded the fellows, as they called them, to travel to the site, they put them up, and I don't think there was a stipend. I think you just got everything covered. And it was very intense. You had breakfast together, you had lunch together, you went out to dinner together, and you were together all day. And some people continued going out at night and made good friends there. It was there. You can't see the picture; it's hidden there. But there was at least one camp edit romance that became a wedding at some point. But it was you met people that you ended up being friends with for most of your career because they were in the same place as you when you were starting. It was a really tight-knit community, and as a person who taught it, I found that I learned more about what was going on in editing because of this constant flux of people coming in. A lot of the people who took the class kind of fell into two groups. There was the person who wants to start an edition. They might be a scholar of history or of literature. They have an idea, but they don't really know the practicalities of editing. And they were often engaged at a very high level because they needed to come up with a transcription policy. They needed to figure out how they were going to fund this thing. So they were always very engaged. And I think that they were like one of the big parts of our group. The second were the new hires at established projects. So we would have, the Thomas Jefferson papers would hire 2 new students, and they would have them go through Camp Edit to give them a broad base in what editing was. That's how I did it. You can't see me either, I'm in the corner. You can't see my terrible perm. But I went there in 1990 when I was first hired at the Margaret Sanger papers, and I learned, how people do transcription. I worked on a microfilm, but you still got this kind of, there's more than one way to do it, and the way we do it isn't always the the only choice. A lot of these people were not as deeply engaged as the scholar, the people starting projects, because they're like, everyone, all these decisions have already been made at my project. It's not for me to decide to change our policy on selection. But they were good at giving us different points of view and experiences at different projects. So I think those were the two main people that came to these. As a teacher at Camp Edit, I found it extremely helpful to not only keep me in with what was going on with editing, but to meet people, to kind of get that enthusiasm back. I don't know if you work all day, doing your one project. It's nice to meet other people that care about whether that's a comma or a period, that want to know about what we're doing. I think that we also found out different kinds of ways that people are editing, things that they wanted to edit. It helped to broaden the idea of what an editing project was. It also helped to ingratiate them into the ADE, to help them meet people. I was always at the end, let's go to the ADE cocktail party. You go talk to that one. You go talk to this one. So it helped to get them engaged in the organization. But the one thing is we pretty much taught the same course every year. So the takeaways are, I had some people send me some quotes, but it was a really good boot camp. It was a really good get you going, get excited, and then here's some resources to keep going. And I think that it formed friendships with people that lasted their whole careers. But the bad side of this is that not everyone could attend. There was a competitive process to become one of the 20 to 24 people. There was a rubric that I didn't think was terribly fair. It kind of focused on people who needed the help least, I always thought. It was people who were already at an established project, people whose project was already funded by the NHPRC. They had priority. So you could see that you're accepting people, but there's more interest than we could handle. Because we funded the travel of the people, you couldn't really expand the class because it wasn't any extra money. So it made it, it was always the same class every year. As a teacher, you get tired of that at a certain point. Like, I didn't even prepare at some point. I just would throw my slides up and start talking. So we thought about how to re-envision it, and what we thought was to create them as online courses instead of in person, and that would reach more people. We got a lot of pushback on that. Most of the editors really liked the Camp Edit experience, and they thought that was going to be lost, and that was bad. But they didn't seem to value the fact that hundreds more people will be able to do this every year or more, depending on how many. Katie might know the numbers. But we could also use the funding instead of to teach the same course over and over again to add new courses, so that you could teach the main ones and then add more courses as you go on. And then we also found as we did it that, I would talk for an hour and a half on transcription, but now there's a transcription module that takes about 3.5 hours to do. So it's better, it's got more examples, it's got more meat to it than you get in just a quick talk. So that's kind of where we headed with that. And I guess what we also saw was the original course was designed to just give you a smattering of everything. But now we can kind of dive in and we can develop courses that might interest someone who's running a project versus a course who's interested in someone who's doing research, or different kinds of texts that they might be focused on. So I think that by re-envisioning how we teach this, I think it's helped to broaden what we are teaching. So we thought about this free online course, and there was a lot of debate in the beginning about whether it should be synchronous, where everyone actually gets together in a Zoom meeting and we have class and maybe they meet people and get to know each other, or whether we wanted to do it where we would just allow people to take a course as a group and maybe have a chat function where they could try to get to know each other. And we ended up just doing a course you could take by yourself because it seemed simpler and it seemed more flexible, and I hope that it's the right choice. So we also thought we'd be able to get a lot of different people involved in this that might not be wanting to be an editor but might want to learn about copyright, or might want to learn about one of the topics that we cover. So I guess for us, I should talk just said that stuff. Yeah, the question for us that I'm hoping maybe you can comment on later and we get to questions is how can we rebuild the community part of it, which we haven't done yet, right? Yeah, so I'm going to let Katie take over because she has the current e-labs and I have more of the gestational e-labs.
Hi everyone, can those in the back hear me okay? Great. So as Kathy mentioned, she gave us the background as to where e-laboratories came from, and the beginning ideas as to how we were going to evolve into this online learning community. She mentioned that our origins of e-laboratories was about transitioning an existing workshop into an online course series. But it's become a lot larger than that since we have begun that work. And so before I dive into the types of courses we have created as a result of that transition, I'd like to set the framework for what eLab stands as today and how we'd like to continue into the future. So when we started the work of transitioning the online courses, we also embarked on a listening tour, or more specifically, our grants program officer and my supervisor embarked on a listening tour with a wide variety of individuals who are engaging in practices connected with editing, recovery, and other research activities committed to making source materials more accessible, more discoverable, or in the cases of creative expressions that allow for acts of rememory, opportunities for reimagining source materials, especially when there are silences within the archive. So as they embarked on this listening tour, we learned that there is a very wide community of practitioners that are beyond individuals who think of themselves as editors. Those include community archivists, editors, digital humanists, recovery practitioners, ethnic studies scholars, students, and a large variety of other individuals. A very good example of this broad community can be seen in the grant recipients of the past 3 years from the NHPRC Mellon Fanning Grant, where you can see a large variety of practitioners who are engaged as community-based projects where there are collaborations between a university or similar institution with community leaders or community groups. So our goal was to support this wide variety of practitioners and whatever form their project may take, at whatever stage their project was in. So our purpose was to grow beyond just transitioning into creating these online courses, but to create a community for individuals who are interested in not only growing their practice, but challenging the discourse around this work. So we set about to create a list of principles that would guide us as we were selecting, developing, and hosting events and courses on our site. You can't see it fully on this screen because of Zoom, but I do want to point that we are very thankful to various institutions who have put forward similar principles, and that includes the Center for Black Digital Research, the Digital Humanities Summer Institute, and the USLEH, who have put forward statements of ethics, conduct, and mission that we looked to when developing our own principles. So let me dive into some of those principles. There are 6 in total, and they can be outlined by these wider headings of inclusivity, diversity of practice, diversity of practitioners, and then the next 3 will be on the next slide. So as I mentioned, we wanted to be more inclusive to the wider variety of practitioners who were engaged in this work. So this meant also widening our understanding of what work was being done and what the end products were that were being created. We no longer wanted to focus on additions as the sole end product of the work that people were engaging in, but instead looked to the fact that editing practices and archival practices were the very tools people were using to improve the accessibility and discoverability of materials. And so it was those practices that we wanted to put forward and ensure that a diversity of practice could be represented, not only within the courses, but within the practitioners who were coming forward to e-laboratories. We also wanted to respect the fact that every project was unique and would have its own needs in terms of how they were presenting the materials, because the materials might be very sensitive, they might be community owned, and so we wanted to respect that not only were the practitioners coming to e-labs the best custodians of the materials they were working with, but also the best stewards for determining how those materials should be presented. So in our courses and in our events, we try to be careful in not prescribing any particular practice or methodology, but instead providing a slew of examples of real-world projects, as well as a arrangement or an array of different practices in use, so that practitioners could make decisions for themselves based off of what was best for their own projects and materials. We also wanted this to be a place where the individuals who were leading events and developing courses were challenged by the practitioners who were taking them, who were themselves learning in the process of helping to advance those who were just getting started with their projects. So we like to think of this as an open ecosystem where we are co-creating the courses and events together. This is best represented by the advisory board that we have today, who are responsible for defining the topics of the courses or events that they'd like to create. But in that, we also have made it possible all throughout the site for people to not only request courses specific to a topic they're interested in, but also to propose a course or event that they would like to host themselves. Okay, so I'd like to dig into the types of resources that we've created after developing these principles and setting the foundation of eLabs. As Cathy mentioned, this began with the transition to an online course series, which is titled the Fundamentals Course Series. But we've developed a wider variety of resources that we hope will encourage this community of practice and help everyone to come together and have a very open discourse about the work that they are doing. So I'll dig into each of these. So the Fundamentals course series includes 14 different courses that can be taken in any sequence and in any selection. So Fundamentals is not meant to be prescriptive, but more about the fundamental aspects of your project. What type of decisions do you want to make about your data if you're interested in transcribing your documents? What type of considerations are involved when securing copyright permission for putting images of your materials up online? So you can take these in any order, and you don't have to take all 14. As we are very focused on making these courses and other materials as accessible as possible, and thinking about the fact that there is a large number of community-based practitioners, we strongly focused on presenting these courses very practically. We focus on providing as many examples of projects in practice today, as well as providing exercises or opportunities for people to begin making decisions about their own projects in context with the courses that they are taking at that moment in time. As part of the courses, as well as the site in general, there is a glossary of pop-up definitions that are site-wide, and they appear on every single page so that there is a shared language among users on the site, so that if you were to come across the word editor, you would not feel excluded if that is not something that you define yourself as in your term of practice. I would specifically like to point out two terms that we have begun using more frequently to be as inclusive as possible to the users coming to this site, as well as to show the non-hierarchical community that we would like to create. And so the first of these words is practitioner, as you might have heard me using throughout this presentation. We have moved away from calling people editors because we recognize that not everyone coming into eLabs is going to be creating an edition, or they do not think of themselves as an editor. And so it's more useful to reflect the wider variety of practices by just reflecting that they're practitioners and everyone brings their own expertise and focus. The other term that we have been using is that those individuals who guide courses, who develop the courses, we do not refer to them as faculty because that can come with connotations of expertise and hierarchy, but instead we use the term guide because we want to encourage users to feel like they are being guided to different examples, being introduced to this world, but certainly not being prescribed to a final bounded system of what editing, recovery, or other research projects could look like. In addition to our site-wide glossary, we have personal documentation that allows for users to begin making decisions for their own projects and be able to easily reference them within the context of each course that they created these materials in. And so all of the documentation can be referenced from your own profile, as well as by revisiting the course that you created them in. So we want to expand beyond the existing, the workshop that this developed out of, and start creating additional courses that look to topics that might not have been explored in the original instance of Camp Edit, but that allow practitioners to explore really specialized topics or topics that are more conceptual, that require some additional reflection, some time to sit on it and return to. So as of this time, we have 5 courses that have either been recently published or are currently in development. The one that has been recently published was developed by Cathy Hajo. Highly recommend it if you're looking to develop your own collection and are struggling to find documents that are privately held or dispersed along archives. But we have 4 others that are in development, such as ethical considerations for digital editions, which examines things like how do you create a controlled vocabulary when dealing with sensitive materials, or more generally when making decisions about how to represent people and places, so that you are sensitive to the variety of audiences that might be coming to your edition. We have a course on concepts of community in terms of how we consider, how we make different definitions of community and how that impacts the type of research work that we do. So those should be coming forward in the next year or so. We also have been putting on events to try to recreate that community from Camp Edit. I can't say that this has been especially beneficial to fostering the type of community that we had hoped to recreate from Camp Edit, but that is not to say that we haven't put forward some really interesting topics that have started to explore some of the work that is ongoing within community groups, the type of tools that are being used, and the types of ways that recovery and creative rememory is ongoing today. So I encourage you to check out some of those recordings online. And then so beyond the courses and events that we've been hosting, something that we tried to build into the site to encourage community were our practitioner and project directories. These allow you to be as, there's a lot of options here for you to determine how much information you feel comfortable sharing with the public, with other practitioners. But if you're interested in putting up a profile, this is a great way to not only promote your own work, but to promote all the different projects that you've been a part of, and then to connect with others on things like the tools that you're working with, or where you might be geographically located, or whether you're interested in working with correspondence versus visual materials like postcards. And then because we want to encourage practitioners to become guides themselves to host events, we have also connected the practitioner profiles to all of the contributions you make to the eLabs website, so that people can see not only your work, but how you're contributing to this community discourse. Okay, I'll turn it back over to Kathy.
Last slide. Yeah, so when we get to the question and answer, which we're planning to do at the end of all the presentations, we want to think about how we can try to build a remote or online community of practice where people will actually start reaching out to each other, asking them questions and things like that. We're wondering if we can create regional eLabs cohorts that could meet in person if they want to, or people, you know, like you said, build it around whatever tool they're using. Could we foster a way for people to communicate that way? I don't think many people use like those old e-discussion lists anymore, but those were always very helpful when you had a TEI question. You could just throw it up there and somebody would answer you. So can we do that with what we're building here? I think that's the challenge too. Once we get more people in, like, can we kind of build this up and make it stronger? I guess that's the end of our. We have one more
slide.
Yeah. Sorry. It's the thank you slide.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this would not be at all possible with the number of individuals who contributed to the development of the Fundamentals course series, and then now in this second phase of working with an advisory board who are helping us to co-create the next offering of events and courses. It's a very large advisory board, but we hope that it reflects not comprehensively, but certainly a start reflects the wide variety of communities that we'd like to engage with. So thank you very much to both Noelle and Cathy for serving on that advisory board.
So I'm really excited to be here today and continue the discussion about diversity of practice and practitioners and widening accessibility. So first, let me tell you what COVE is. COVE stands for the Collaborative Organization for Virtual Education. It was founded, as it says here, in 2016. Like both eLabs and scholarly editing, COVE Editions and COVE itself was founded to serve a wide community of editing and recovery practitioners. COVE is a scholar-driven open access platform, and it publishes both peer-reviewed material, and it also serves as an active learning or flipped classroom platform so that student projects can be built with online tools. Those student projects ultimately could become peer-reviewed and published online too, thinking of this widening of practitioners. But if Katie can go to the next slide. COVE, as I'm suggesting here, operates on two platforms. And the next slide shows a section of that. Oh, I'm not seeing the slides advance. I'm sorry. Can you go back one? I'm sorry. Okay, so we have COVE Studio, and this, we call it a playground because this is a place where instructors can create anthologies of primary works that can be made available for students and for multimedia annotation. Now, this wouldn't only have to be done with students, it could be with anybody that's working on COVE, and you can create these anthologies of primary works. COVE already has a large catalog library of works that we have there that I'll talk more about, and you can upload things as well, and I'll get more into that. COVE Editions is where we have public-facing and published works, and this is where we have our position. We do have what we would consider more typical critical editions, but we're really a place that is widening the idea of what can be made, because we also have the capability to publish galleries of images. We have maps and timelines as well. One thing that is amazing about COVE that took me to it myself is that no coding is necessary for this. So this is very welcoming platform. It's very easy to use. And it was designed to facilitate what COVE founder Dino Fallujah and his colleagues have called open assembly, which is the free transformative remixing of text that Katie, Cathy, and Noelle have just talked about. We can remix text, we can remix items, archives, images, all of these things together. We see this as open assembly that really creates and engages critical thinking and creativity. It really acknowledges and celebrates readers' subjectivity. So we really want to get as many voices in there as possible. And you'll hear me say that a bunch of times here. But continuing our focus on remixing and repurposing, let us tell you with the next slide about COVE's approach to critical editions. At COVE, you can create and publish a digital critical edition. That critical edition, though, isn't necessarily just the typical thing put online, the typical critical edition that we grew up with on the Norton anthologies and whatnot, but rather this site allows for text and paratext. We, like I said, galleries, timelines, and maps, and I'll show you that. Peer-reviewed editions are also open access for folks to use. And the peer review process is very much, like Katie was saying before, not prescriptive, but it is about facilitating the creator's choices instead of prescribing what needs to be done to fit some imagined ideal of what an edition would be. This is a place that we want to see opening up research and broadening what we can consider as research and how we present our research. In terms of the editions, we are very interested in opening up the canon. And if you click to the next slide has a list of our some of our editions and that next slide speaks of a handful of editions: The Doom of the Great City, The Portrait of Mr. W.H., and Mystery in Scarlet. That line that's in green there, these texts would not be available elsewhere. These were actually, some of them had the people behind them had gone to publishers and said, nobody's going to pay for that. We're not going to do that. So, but these people were dedicated to these works. The Doom of the Great City, a short story about climate change. Portrait of Mr. W.H. This is an Oscar Wilde work, and I'll show some slides from that in just a second. Mystery in Scarlet, also an early detective work. Do know that these examples that I'm offering are from the Victorian era, because that is where Cove started as a Victorian work. But as we are very excited to note, we are very much expanding that canon, working, as maybe some of you know, with the same philosophy as the undisciplining the Victorian classroom folks. And this is, Victorian studies is known for being a lot of very white, very England-focused text, and we are opening up to the empire because of so many grants that the Cove folks have been very successful in getting. They have expanded the texts in our library that work with BIPOC works, as well as, and including that, we have works from One More Voice. So this is expanding that. But before I get fully into that, if you can click to the next slide, what I'd like to show you about what's very unique about the digital editions that we can have magnified facsimiles and have the primary text alongside with annotations. With those annotations, while what you see right here is just text, the platform allows for the uploading of images, of videos, of further links, so it becomes a very expansive work. In the next slide, what you'll see is from the Portrait of Mr. W.H. This was a serialized work, and what this is the covers, or the first pages of the serialized portions. This, to be able to reproduce this, to be able to have people see this up close and personal, this would simply have not been possible in a print edition, and Cove is making that possible. So we find that very exciting. So this is what we do in terms of editions. I'd like to speak next about anthologies, and that's where our next slide will take us. With anthologies, with our key innovations there, with the anthologies, you know, this isn't about buying a set anthology. This is about putting together your own anthology. Now, Cove itself has 17.5 million words of text already downloaded. Like I said, we started in the Victorian era. We have texts from every era and trying to move out to every nationality. As I mentioned, we have works from the One More Voice project. If you advance to the next slide, I have a shot from the One More Voice project. And what that project is very focused on is engaging us with voices of racialized creators in the British Imperial and colonial archives. Anyone who uses Cove can access any of these texts freely. So we have this basis as one of our ways of expanding the diversity of the texts that people can bring to their anthologies, to even ones that they would work on, whether that's with students or with their own scholarly work. In the next slide, I have works by and about people of color, and this is showing us the expansion of what Cove is putting up there. And, I took a screenshot, so you're not getting the whole of what we have there at all. But there's some really exciting work, ongoing work. In terms of this conference and reinvention, this is something that, in a way, is happening daily at Cove with the addition of so many more texts. And I'll speak about how our community of users is also adding to our texts. But in tandem with, this idea of recovery and remixing, Cove is very much built on the philosophy that having a multiplicity of voices engaging with any text under consideration is going to enhance our engagement of it. So we absolutely encourage teams of diverse editors with the additions that I just spoke of. And in fact, in terms of all of the editions that are published, it's very atypical to just see one person being the creator behind that. This is typically a group that is brought together. Sometimes we have folks from art history, then literary scholars. We've seen that kind of combination happen. What's also really exciting, this is a place for emerging scholars. So we have a lot of works by graduate students, and even we're getting undergraduate voices in there too. As this becomes a more widely used teaching tool, we're hoping that our communities could expand beyond those, maybe just even in arts and humanities, and could go beyond what we would consider typical academia. But one of the things that not only do we want people working together, but we actually facilitate that by how we do social annotation. That's my next slide here. With social annotation, I'm giving you a sense of what it looks like. It's simple, like you would typically do, highlighting a section, and then you have your comments to the side here. As you can see, you can upload videos, and then there could be images and links. This is also a place where people can continue a conversation. This is just something that was used for a conference presentation, but this is what you would see in a possibly published work as well. So this ongoing conversation really facilitated by what we have at Cove. In the next slide is one of our new innovations. Because of an NEH grant, we are now able to annotate images, as you will see right here. The blue splotches are the places within the image that people have annotated. And again, the annotations look the same, but they facilitate the conversation, the use of videos, links, all of that. In the next slide, you'll see what's very nice. If you click on a specific annotation, it slides you right into that section of the image. So all of the images that you would work with on Cove, whichever side of the platform you use, you can get this up close and personal view of the images that you you can't get in a print edition, often even in a physical realm, you might not be able to get the kind of detail that you could with this visual. And I'm making a point of that because that's sliding me into this image annotation is a really nice balance to what we have already established in terms of tools. We have a gallery tool, we have a timeline and a map tool. Gallery tools, and if you go to the next slide, you'll see an example of this. Gallery tools are where one can use images. And what happened here, Kathryn Golden at Skidmore, caught in the COVID pandemic. She was going to do a museum exhibition, she and her students, of works that were in the archive at the library there. Specifically, their images of animals, Victorian animals. And, the students were bringing together the images and would write museum notes. This all turned online, and she has stuck with doing online exhibitions because this has given more capabilities of seeing the images in a more up close and personal way, and getting to a wider audience, because anybody with the link for this is open access. They could see the work that these students did. Now, and I see this as allowing for different ways of presenting research and different ways of thinking about it. The timeline that you'll see next is another way that we could present research and start thinking of research in a different way. This is something I just had students do before we went to London on a study abroad. They were tasked with finding a place in London and looking at events that happened in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries there. And we presented that on a timeline that was also linked with a map. If you go to the map, you'll see the next thing. We have a map, you drop the points there, and you can also present your research about those specific areas. Really exciting ways to think about, are there projects that could be presented this way that would really shift how we're thinking about presenting what we've dug into? So that's really exciting. Continuing on to the next slide, I just wanted to make clear that as any users of Cove can do, they can upload their own documents. You can see on the slide the range of documents that people can upload and work on those in terms of their own research. A lot of these innovations that have come to Cove is from listening to our communities. And our community of users, we have consistent workshops throughout the year. They can even be offered on request for people who have specific projects in mind, or some are just introductions to what Cove is. In the next slide, though, we get to brag a little bit about what we did at the Digital Humanities Summer Institute in Victoria. We actually had a hands-on 1-week workshop focused on Cove and how to use it. Now, as much as Rebecca and I taught there, we also learned from the practitioners there and learned of the different ways, different ideas of how to use Cove, taking those back to the folks that innovate, write the grant proposals, and work with that. The gentleman in the middle, I'll just say a minute about him. He's working with a team of other folks who are looking into juvenilia and wanting to bring together an anthology. This would be a presentation of their research, but it would also ultimately be a teaching tool. We really like the flexibility that the Cove platforms allow to have that both research presentation and teaching side. So I have our contact information there. I just want to end by reiterating, we see Cove as especially inviting to emerging scholars and those who want to envision more and different ways of approaching and presenting research. And I think that's where all of our presentations today really interlock and intertwine, and hopefully will continue to grow. Thank you so very much.